A poor woman stood outside a dusty town store, holding an empty basket, hoping someone might help her. But the store owner looked at her with cold eyes and turned her away, saying there was no credit and no charity today. Hungry, embarrassed, and with nowhere else to go, she slowly stepped away from the door, trying not to cry. But someone was watching. Across the street, a quiet cowboy leaned against the post beside his horse. He had seen everything, and what he did next changed her life forever. He walked straight up to the woman, looked at her empty basket, and said something no one expected. "Come with me, I will fill your table tonight." What happened after that moment would not only change her life, but would prove that sometimes one small act of kindness can rewrite someone's entire story. Stay with me, because this is a story about hope, compassion, and the day a cowboy refused to let a stranger go hungry. The evening wind moved slowly across the dusty road of the small western town, where tired horses waited beside wooden posts, and the fading sun painted the sky with a deep gold glow. People passed the front of the general store, carrying bags of flour and beans, while the bell above the door rang again and again as customers came and went. Near the steps of the store stood a young woman with worn shoes and a thin coat, her eyes fixed on the ground, as if she hoped the earth might hide her from the world. Her name was Clara, and hunger had followed her for many long days. The shopkeeper had just turned her away with a hard voice, telling her there would be no credit and no charity today. The words still echoed in her ears, while shame burned quietly in her chest. Across the street, a tall cowboy watched everything from the shade of a wooden awning. His hat was low over his brow, and his boots were covered in the dust of a long ride. The townsfolk knew him only as Daniel, a quiet rider who kept to himself and spoke little but always paid fair for what he needed. Daniel saw the way Clara held her hands together, and how she tried to step away before anyone noticed the tears in her eyes. The world had taught him to recognize that kind of silence, because once long ago he had worn the same look. Clara began to walk down the road, slowly, hoping to disappear before anyone spoke to her, but Daniel stepped away from the post where his horse waited and crossed the street with steady, calm steps. The boards of the wooden walkway creaked beneath his boots as he came close enough to see the tired lines in her face. For a moment he simply stood beside her, letting the quiet settle between them. Then he spoke in a voice gentle but firm. "Come with me, I will fill your table tonight." Clara lifted her eyes in surprise. She had expected another harsh voice, another order to move along, another reminder that she had nothing. Yet the man beside her carried no anger and no pity, only a calm certainty that felt strangely safe. She hesitated, unsure whether to believe him. The world had not been kind to strangers, offering help. Daniel noticed the doubt and gave a small nod toward the horse waiting across the street. "Not far from here," he said softly. "I have a cabin and enough food for 2, maybe even 3 if we stretch the stew. A little hunger should not chase anyone out of a town." The wind stirred again, carrying the smell of dust and distant cattle. Clara looked toward the store once more, remembering the door closing behind her and the quiet laughter of a few men inside. Something in her heart decided that standing alone on the street would lead nowhere. So she nodded once and followed Daniel across the road. The horse lifted its head as they approached, and Daniel patted the animal gently before helping Clara climb into the saddle. He walked beside the horse rather than riding, because the trail was narrow and he seemed in no hurry. The town slowly faded behind them as the sun lowered toward the horizon, painting the land with long shadows. For a while they traveled in silence, broken only by the soft sound of hooves on dirt and the whisper of wind through dry grass. Clara wondered why a stranger would show kindness when the world so often looked away. Finally she spoke quietly, asking why he had helped her when others would not. Daniel kept walking with steady steps before answering. "Because someone once did the same for me when I had nothing left, and if kindness stops with the man who receives it, then it dies before it can grow." The trail curved between low hills, and after some time, a small cabin appeared beside a stand of old cottonwood trees. A thin line of smoke drifted from the chimney, promising warmth and food. Daniel tied the horse near the porch and opened the door, inviting Clara inside. The cabin was simple but clean. A wooden table stood near the center, and a small stove glowed with gentle heat. Daniel moved easily around the room, placing a pot over the fire and adding beans, dried meat, and a handful of spices. The smell of cooking soon filled the air, wrapping the small space with comfort. Clara sat quietly watching, as if the ordinary act of preparing food had become something almost magical. When the stew was ready, Daniel placed 2 bowls on the table and motioned for her to eat. Clara lifted the spoon slowly at first, unsure if the moment was real, but the first taste brought warmth that spread through her tired body. She ate carefully at first, then with growing hunger, while Daniel sat across from her, eating with quiet patience. Outside, the night settled over the hills, and the stars began to shine above the dark land. Inside the cabin, the firelight flickered across the wooden walls, and Clara felt something she had nearly forgotten, a sense of safety that did not demand anything in return. After the meal, Daniel leaned back slightly and asked where she had come from. Clara told him about the farm that had failed after months of drought, about the long road she had walked searching for work, and about the doors that closed one by one until the small town had seemed like her final chance. Daniel listened without interrupting, his eyes thoughtful, as if weighing every word. When she finished, he stood and stepped to the door, looking out at the quiet night. "Tomorrow," he said slowly, "we will see what the morning brings. No one should face the world alone if there is another path." Clara did not know what the morning would bring either, but as the fire warmed the room and the hunger faded from her body, she felt the first small spark of hope begin to glow inside her heart. Morning light slipped gently through the cabin, window touching the wooden floor with soft gold. Clara woke slowly, unsure for a moment where she was, until the smell of fresh coffee reached her, and she heard the quiet sound of boots moving across the floor. Daniel was already awake, preparing breakfast with the same calm patience he had shown the night before. Outside, the sky stretched wide and clear over the hills, promising a bright day. The world felt different in the morning light, as if the troubles of yesterday had softened during the night. Clara stepped outside for a moment, breathing the cool air, while the wind moved through the cottonwood trees. The land seemed endless yet peaceful. Daniel soon joined her, carrying 2 plates of warm bread and eggs. They sat on the porch steps eating while the sun climbed higher above the hills. For the first time in many days, Clara felt strength returning to her body. After breakfast, Daniel saddled the horse and looked toward the distant road leading back to town. Clara wondered if the kindness of the night would end, now that the sun had risen, but Daniel turned to her with the same steady calm. "There is a ranch a few miles from town," he said. "The owner is an old friend of mine, and he always needs help during the busy months. If you are willing to work, I believe he will give you a fair chance." Clara felt surprise again, but this time hope rose with it. She nodded quickly, ready to try anything that might give her a place to stand again in the world. They rode together across the wide land, the morning sun warming the earth beneath them. Daniel guided the horse along trails that wound through open fields and low hills, while birds circled in the bright sky above. After some time, the shape of a large ranch appeared in the distance, with barns, fences, and cattle moving slowly across the grass. As they approached, a group of workers paused to watch the riders arrive. At the center of the yard stood an older rancher, with gray hair and strong shoulders built from years of hard work. Daniel greeted him with a friendly nod, and the 2 men spoke for several minutes, while Clara waited nearby, feeling the familiar tension of uncertainty. Finally, the rancher walked toward her, studying her face with thoughtful eyes. "Daniel says you are looking for work," the man said slowly. "This land rewards those who do not give up easily." Clara met his gaze with quiet determination. "I'm not afraid of hard work," she answered. The rancher considered her words, then gave a short nod. "Good," he said. "We start early and finish late, but anyone who pulls their weight earns a place here." Relief washed through Clara like a warm tide. She thanked him sincerely, and the rancher called for one of the workers to show her the tasks of the day. Soon she was helping repair fences, carry water, and feed the animals. The work was heavy, but every task filled her with growing pride, because it meant she was no longer drifting without purpose. Daniel watched for a moment from the edge of the yard, satisfied that the path ahead was opening for her. When Clara looked toward him, he tipped his hat slightly before turning his horse back toward the trail. Days turned into weeks, and Clara proved stronger than anyone expected. She worked from sunrise to sunset, learning quickly and earning the respect of the other workers. The rancher often nodded with quiet approval when he saw the determination in her efforts. One evening, as the sun sank low across the fields, Clara noticed a familiar rider approaching along the road. Daniel returned to the ranch carrying supplies from town. When he dismounted, the rancher greeted him warmly, and Clara walked over with a grateful smile. She told him about the work, the long days, and the sense of belonging she had found among the people there. Daniel listened quietly, pleased to see the change in her spirit. The tired sadness he had seen outside the store was gone, replaced by confidence and strength. As twilight settled across the ranch, they stood together, watching the cattle move slowly across the fields. Clara finally spoke the words she had carried in her heart since that night. "You changed my life when you said, 'Come with me.'" Daniel shook his head gently. "No," he replied. "You changed it when you decided to stand up. Again, all I did was open a door." The stars began to appear above the quiet land, just as they had on the night when a stranger offered kindness on a dusty street. Clara looked across the wide fields, knowing her journey had not ended but had truly begun. And somewhere beyond the hills, the small town still stood, with its wooden store and ringing bell, but the story that began with a closed door had grown into something far greater, a reminder that a single moment of compassion can change the road beneath a wandering soul and lead it toward a place where hope can finally sit at the table and stay for good.